program for right at 30 years. I started as a wrangler out at the horse corrals long time ago. Anyway, Silky was kind of wanting me to talk about a little bit of animal behavior, and especially on the lines of like the studs and how out on the wild, I mean, like yesterday, and it's too bad that we weren't here yesterday because it was kind of a good example of it. These horses have, they'll break off into their bands, and some are, you know, bigger bands. Some stud will have, like, sometimes they'll just have a mare, or they'll even be by themselves, depending. There'll be bachelor bands where a bunch of the younger studs will group up together. But like she was explaining, which is very true, a lot of people don't understand because, like, a lot of domestic studs, if you turn a bunch of studs out together, or even a couple, you know, they're going to immediately start fighting, and there's going to be a lot of issues. It's a different environment with these horses. There'll be times, just like at the water holes that you guys have seen, I mean, you could have, I mean, at times, literally hundreds of horses at one herd, or at one water hole at a time. Not that there isn't fighting, but the majority of the time, these horses, what happens is, you know, once they've foaled or whatever, and then the mares come back into heat, well, then they're bred, and then everything's at peace for a year. So that's actually the most natural environment. That's why, like I said, there's plenty of times, yes, there is times, you know, when there's a mare in heat that the studs will fight over that mare. But if everything is normal, the mares are bred and everybody's at peace, so they can come together. And there's no fighting, there's really no issues. Everybody just kind of, you know, drinks their water and moves on. And like we were discussing too, it's kind of scary because there is times, yes, that studs will kill babies. Not that it's never happened, but the majority of the time with wild horses, they don't do that either. And even like some people that have been raised around here, but just with domestic studs, like we've got them as employees. And for an example, we had two foals, two weanling foals, and we had a pen of studs that were going to go back to the range. So we had those foals, and they were eventually going to go back too. So I said, you know, go ahead and just stick those foals out in that one pen with all these studs. I mean, immediately everybody was up in arms. You know, these babies were going to get attacked and killed. And wild horses, it's just not like that. No, they don't. I mean, they didn't even look at them twice. So, like I said, it's just Mother Nature. I mean, if that was always going on, these animals would never populate, I guess, if the horses were always killing each other and all this horrible stuff. It doesn't happen that way. But the problem too, like I was mentioning earlier, with the natural state, that basically there's peace for a year after the mare is bred. And that's some of the problems that there is with like PZP that people don't understand, because PZP, the mares will still cycle. So for year round, these mares are coming in and out of heat, which in turn is making these studs fight over these mares. And there's been, you know, I mean, it happens a lot when you have PZP and these mares keep coming in. Well, they're also basically getting bred by this stud and that stud. And so this is a constant thing, which that in turn causes a lot more crippled horses, because that fighting doesn't stop. That poor mare, think what that mare has to go through all year long when she keeps cycling. So that's kind of on the lines where Lisa was trying to do something with a space study. It wasn't because we were trying to be barbaric or anything. It was actually putting them in a spay mare is more actually natural, if you want to think about it, than a horse that is PZP'd.
And you don't have to gather her.
And again, you don't have to regather. So does anybody have any questions about anything I've said so far?
I'm just wondering, so I heard about that there are, in the bands, that normally there's not only one stud, so sometimes there are lieutenants in there. How does this work?
Well, I mean, there's no absolute in the wild animal world. There just isn't. Yeah, you'll have bands where there will actually be, 2 or 3 studs with them. But there's usually a dominant stud, and it's just called basically we call it a pecking order. I mean, everybody knows their place. There's usually a lead mare. She's usually the brains, actually, of yeah. She runs the herd.
That's in human life too, huh?
Yeah. So, she's usually the most aware. She's usually the one who, is the first into water. She's the one who is in charge of that band.
If you see them moving, she'll be out in the lead, picking the route, when the stud's snaking behind and bringing everybody else.
Yes. Yeah.
But and another thing about these bands is they switch
Yes.
all the time. It's not breeding, mating for life like a goose or whatever. But they switch mares and things change. So it's not always, like Wendy said, it's not a constant. And just to know that's important, and it's very important for smaller herds where we don't want to have a lot of inbreeding, and so that's a really good thing when they are moving around and changing bands.
Yeah.
Some of those younger, if there's a younger stud in with that bunch, like maybe the older stud will say, it's time for you to go. And you guys have probably watched it. They've actually had videos and stuff. They will run this poor thing to death because all it wants to do is get back with its family. And they're like, no, we're done. It's time to move on. It's time to grow up. So, no, there's those people that want to keep these specific family bands all the time. And that isn't Mother Nature either. They'll go, like I said, there'll be times where in the spring, they'll go down to the water hole. If there's a big bunch, whatever, the studs will fight for mares. And there's times where, somebody else wins that band. And then those mares will be with that other stud. And it's always changing, always.
So how old are the cows before they
Get kicked out?
Yeah.
That is all, it just depends. Sometimes you'll see some of these younger studs staying with them for a while, and some, they get to be about a year or two, and they're kicked out.
Yeah.
So it's just on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
I've seen bands where you have some older studs. That, there'll be 3 or 4 older studs kind of hanging together, and then there'll be some mares and some foals with them.
You just accept them.
Yep.
It's personalities, I guess. But around
Yep.
3 or 4 is when they typically
Normally,
kick
yeah.
them out. Those are those little bachelor bands that are nice because they're very curious and they'll come up to you and scope you out. They're glad to see.
I think it needs to be discussed that a lot of people don't understand. Like earlier, Lisa was talking about there was going to be another, like with 1,000 head, you can figure another 200 head on average, of full crop. They think 20% per year is what happens out on the range. Well, after they're gathered, it's more like 80% of the foals are going to live. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of people that say, it's horrible, they should be out, that's the safest and everything, and the environment at the facility is horrible. Well, if that was the case, then those numbers would be different. They would be swapped.
We have 2 different methods of being able to capture these animals, and mainly what we use is helicopter gathers, because we have 500,000 acres that we have to cover and try to capture hundreds of animals, and it's really a very effective and safe way. In Oregon, actually in the BLM, injuries related to gather activities for both helicopter and bait trapping is less than 1%, which is pretty good when you're dealing with a wild animal, because a lot of wildlife agencies, and I've gotten quotes from our local agents here, if they're hitting 4%, that's when they stop, and 4% death related to the capture activity, that's when they stop and reevaluate. But we're at less than 1%, and so I feel like as a whole, the BLM is doing a really good job of making sure it's safe and efficient, and safe for the animals and for the handlers. But for helicopter gathers, we're very careful about certain times of the year that we do it. We can't start until after July 1st, and so after most of the breeding or the foaling season is over, and most foals are a little bit older and can travel some distance. And usually when they do, the helicopter goes way out and starts kind of bumping these horses forward. They stay pretty high. They get them heading in the right direction, and if you guys know horses, you know they can trot forever, right? So they keep them at a trot and just keep them lined out. What you see online, what people post the videos online, is that last few seconds when the helicopter, they're really close to the trap. We set up panels, and we have jute, like a fabric, wings to kind of guide those horses in. And when we have public to come and observe the gathers, that's what they see, is that last little bit. And yeah, that pilot has to get closer to those horses and get them kind of running and getting going in there so they can get caught real quickly. The gather contractors will have what's called a Judas horse. It's trained to send out there in front of those horses, and the wild horses then see that horse and lock on and just follow it into the trap. So just realize that those horses haven't run for 15 miles. They've run for maybe half a mile, or a quarter of a mile. They've trotted a ways. So that's how it works. And then once they're in the trap, we quickly try to sort off any real aggressive studs and get them loaded up onto a trailer, and then the mares and foals get loaded up. Sometimes we can't split them that quick, but we take them from that trap site usually to a temporary holding facility that we've created, and that's where we can sort them into mares and foals, studs, or anything that needs special care, a real old horse or something. And from there, then we load up a bigger load to ship them to our facility. We also do, and do you have any questions about helicopter gathers before I move on to bait trapping? We can always go back to it. We also have bait trapping, which is more of a passive way of capturing horses, and a lot of people like the idea of it more because it's passive. We're not scaring the horses into a trap with like a helicopter, but we go out, we find a spot where there's a lot of horses that we can access with a pickup, which is key to bait trapping. There's a lot of places out here we can't just drive to where the horses are. So we start baiting them with salt or alfalfa, something that's tasty at the time of the year. Then once they get accustomed to that, we set up some panels, put the bait in there, and they start walking in. And then once they start coming in, then we'll set the gate with, right now we're using a remote where we have to be sitting out there and we push the button once the whole band goes in, and the gate swings closed behind them. The thing to remember about to compare with helicopter and bait trapping is a helicopter gather, those horses, they're a little winded. They've been traveling a little bit. They're kind of tired, but when the gate closes on a bait trap, when those horses just walked in there and are eating yummy food, they bounce off the walls. So that's where it can get dangerous for the horse and for the handlers. But it is, they originally, I guess, weren't scared, so people like to see that a little bit better. But it's been effective out here in places that we can access. We've gathered probably about 500 horses in the last 3 years by bait trapping, and it's been fun. It's been fun to experience the horses at that state and be able to figure out how to handle them appropriately and all. But we do that on occasion where we can. But like I said, you can't drive everywhere that the horses are. So helicopters are very useful on a lot of these big, huge ranges.
So in Germany, people would prefer, instead of using a helicopter, using some cowboys with horses to gather those horses. Do you think this will work over here?
It's not great. They used to do that, and it was rough on everybody. Their horses, the people, I mean, look at this. And these horses can outrun you on stuff like this. They can outrun any domestic horse on stuff like this for the most part. They grew up on it, and it's dangerous. And it's not very efficient. It's not very quick.
And even I think they have to run or trot.
Yeah.
So it's the same. thing.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, there's spots where maybe you can kind of move some horses out, and it can be done. I don't want to say that it's never, you can't do it. I mean, there's places that it might work, and maybe it's the best in those spots. But on a whole, it's not the most efficient and effective and safe for
But perhaps
everyone involved.
it will be the same stress for the horses. They have to run, and they get just pressure.
Right. I don't know what you
So,
think.
yeah.
Same.
Well, yeah, I mean, every situation is different. I mean, they still use cowboys horseback, you know, if something misses a wing on a major gather or whatever. I mean, they still use horses and guys, but the majority of the time, yeah, I mean, you definitely need, if you're going to try to outrun a wild horses in general actually aren't built for speed, they're built for endurance. So, and most domestic horses, you know, that they take out, they're going to be faster, so they can maybe get them, if you get the right angle on the horse, you know, they can get up to them. But those horses, the wild horses, are probably going to outdo a domestic horse any day of the week. And yeah, especially in ground like this. Can you imagine trying to lope across this wide open on your domestic horse? So it's not safe. But yeah, they still use horses. They do, you know, like, you know, if there's a foal or something that kind of gets dropped back, you know, they'll go back out and get it. And, you know, a lot of times they'll pack them in horseback, you know, stuff like that. But no, the safest, and actually they've proved it time and time again, you know, in most conditions, the safest is helicopter gathers. Here, and this bunch right here, this isn't normal. I mean, they start getting more and more used to people. Not that they're really relying on them right now, but in spots in Nevada, they've actually gone down in people's yards and everything. You know, they're hungry and they're thirsty.
But
See the prior mountains where they come to.
contact, or are they just looking?
Well, I would imagine every time is a, you know, in different time. But yes, I'm sure that some of them, like if people say, you know, here's the food, here's the water, here's this person, they start saying, oh, people are nice. And like I said, some people, you know, they're probably attracted to them.
Prior mountains, for example, where they feed the horses to come closer to the tourists.
Yeah,
They probably can reach out to pet them.
absolutely. There's
And that's the same reason, like the wild dogs or the cats. I mean, they're depending on the food that's there, or the pet cat, or the pet, you know, chicken that's in the backyard. You know, they've figured that out. It's easy.
Yeah.
And so same thing. These horses will figure that out if someone's providing it. Then yeah.
I think it's similar like in holding. So if you bring them in, they are wild, but as all of you saw today, when you went in with the food truck, they were coming close, and even the babies. So last year we were here, we could pet some babies through the fence, because these babies know day by day that humans are great.
But I don't think if you let a wild horse in the wild, like, if they have food and drinks, and I think there is a difference too, that cats and dogs, they're not a prey animal.
Yeah.
I think that's different, because a horse is a prey animal, and they see us as like a carnivore. So if they see us in first sight, like, they want to eat me. And that is the difference between a dog, a cat, and a horse. That a horse will finally, if you push it too far, for example, like if you want to touch them too much, that a horse will flight instead of fight when they can. And horses, cats and dogs, they see us too as a carnivore, but they're the same species. So
Cool.
Well, just for an example, I'm totally off